In a frozen town that shuns her name, one knock in the dead of winter could change everything. Will a stranger's child thaw a heart the world forgot? The winter of 1879 gripped the small town of Eldridge, Iowa, with a quiet ferocity, as if the snow itself whispered secrets no one dared to speak. The streets, lined with clapboard homes, lay buried under drifts that sparkled cruelly under a moonless sky. Chimneys puffed thin smoke, and windows glowed faintly, their curtains drawn tight, not just against the cold, but against the shadow of a name, Miriam Hart. Once a seamstress of delicate repute, now a pariah, her cottage at the town's edge stood like a forgotten prayer, its shingles weathered, its porch sagging under frost. The townsfolk whispered of her past, a birth gone wrong, a mother lost, and a stain they'd never let her wash clean. They shunned her, save for the brave few who slipped coins through her gate for mended cloaks, never meeting her eyes. Inside, Miriam moved with the grace of someone who'd learned to live with ghosts. At 32, her auburn hair streaked with early silver was pinned loosely, framing hazel eyes that held both fire and fatigue. Her woolen dress, patched but pristine, clung to a frame worn thin by years of solitude. A limp in her right leg, the remnant of a childhood fall, slowed her steps but not her hands. By the hearth where embers pulsed like a weary heart, she sat stitching a child's scarf, blue, soft, unworn for a decade. It was her ritual, a tether to a loss she never named. The kettle hummed low, steam curling like a sigh. Outside, the hear, wind moaned, rattling the panes, but Miriam didn't flinch. She'd long since made peace with the storm's voice. Then came the knock. 3 times, soft but steady, like a heartbeat caught in the cold. Not frantic, not demanding, just heavy with need. Miriam set the scarf aside, her fingers still. She rose, the limp more pronounced in the chill, and crossed to the door, her shawl trailing like a shadow. The firelight flickered, casting her silhouette against the wall. A lone figure braced for the world's judgment. She opened the door and the wind rushed in, sharp as a blade. He stood there, a man carved from the storm itself. Elias Boone, 41, his face gaunt beneath a sodden felt hat, dark blonde beard flecked with ice. His gray eyes, dulled by grief, met hers without pleading. His coat, a patched brown wool, dripped onto the porch and his boots left muddy prints in the snow. In his arms, swaddled in a quilt stitched with faded roses, was an infant, its cries small but piercing, like a bell, rung in a fog. The child's face, pale as frost, peeked from the folds, tiny fist trembling. Elias's voice, rough as gravel, broke the silence. He ain't yours, Miriam, but he needs you. She didn't blink, didn't step back. Her gaze dropped to the child, Samuel, though she didn't know his name yet, his breath a fragile mist in the air. Then she looked at Elias, searching the lines of his face. She hadn't seen him in years, not since he'd left Eldridge after his sister's death. Blaming Miriam like the rest, now he stood humbled, a stranger bearing a life. "Why me?" she asked, her voice low, steady, cutting through the wind. Elias shifted, the quilt slipping slightly. "His mother's gone. Fever took her, 2 towns back. I've got no one else." His eyes flickered, not with shame but with surrender. Miriam's jaw tightened. The town called her cursed, a woman who brought death to mothers. Yet here was Elias offering her a child. She stepped aside, not inviting, just yielding to the cold. "Get him out of the wind," she said, her tone flat but not unkind. The hearth welcomed them with a soft crackle. Elias stood awkwardly by, the door water pooling at his feet while Miriam took the child. Her hands, calloused from needlework, cradled him with a tenderness she hadn't felt in years. Samuel's cries softened, his warmth seeping into her. She checked his brow, too hot, hungry. Without a word, she moved to the stove, warming a bottle of goat's milk Elias had brought in a satchel. The firelight danced on her face, etching lines of resolve. Elias watched, silent, his hands clenched as if expecting rejection. She fed Samuel, his small lips latching greedily. The room grew still, save for the fire's murmur and the wind's distant howl. Elias exhaled, a sound close to breaking. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, almost to himself. Miriam didn't look up. "You came far for a woman they call cursed." Her words were sharp, but her hands were gentle, wiping milk from Samuel's chin. Elias didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the flames, as if they held the weight of his choices. She set the bottle down, rocking Samuel as his eyes fluttered shut. The scarf on the chair caught her eye, a silent reminder of what she'd lost. Yet this child, not hers, felt like a thread, pulling her back to life. She glanced at Elias, still by the door, a man who'd walked away from her once. "You staying?" she asked, not inviting, just curious. He shook his head, then paused. "I don't know." She nodded, as if that was answer enough. Miriam carried Samuel to a cradle in the corner, its wood polished but untouched for years. She laid him down, tucking the quilt around him. The firelight softened the room, but the wind outside grew louder, whispering of a town that wouldn't stay silent. She turned to Elias, her hazel eyes unyielding. "You brought him here. What comes next?" He looked at her, then at the cradle, and for the first time, something like hope flickered in his gray eyes. But before he could answer, a shadow moved past the window, a neighbor perhaps, or the town's ever-watchful eyes. What secrets would the dawn bring to a woman who dared to open her door? Dawn broke over Eldridge, Iowa, with a grudging light, the kind that crept through frost-laced windows as if afraid to wake the secrets buried beneath the snow. The town stirred slowly, its clapboard homes exhaling plumes of smoke into a sky heavy with the promise of more cold. In Miriam Hart's cottage, the hearth burned low, its embers casting a fragile warmth across the plank floor. Miriam, 32, her auburn hair loosely pinned, moved with quiet purpose. Her hazel eyes, sharp yet weary, lingered on the cradle, where Samuel slept, his tiny chest rising under the quilt with faded roses. The blue scarf, a relic of her unspoken loss, lay folded on the chair, its threads catching the fire's glow like a memory refusing to fade. Elias Boone stood by the stove, his gaunt frame hunched as he warmed his hands. At 41, his dark blonde beard was streaked with gray, and his gray eyes held the weight of roads too long traveled. His brown wool coat, still damp from the night storm, hung by the door, a silent witness to his arrival. He hadn't slept, not truly. His vigil split between the child and the woman who'd opened her door when no one else would. Miriam handed him a tin mug of chicory coffee, her fingers brushing his calloused palm. Neither acknowledged the touch, but the air felt heavier for it. "He's better," she said, nodding toward Samuel. "Fever's down." Elias nodded, his voice rough. "Thanks to you." The word hung between them, raw and unpolished, a gratitude neither knew how to carry. Miriam turned away, busying herself with a basket of mending, cloaks and mittens left by townsfolk who paid in secret. Her right leg, stiff from the old injury, ached in the morning chill, but she worked through it, her needle flashing like a tiny blade. Elias watched, then spoke, haltingly. "I didn't think you'd take him. Not after what happened." Miriam's hand stilled, the needle poised, above a seam. She didn't look up. "You mean what they say happened?" Elias set the mug down, the clink loud in the quiet. "Your name's poison in Eldridge. They say you let a woman die. Martha Cole, 3 summers back, her baby too." Miriam's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed even. "Martha was dead before she reached my door. Bled out in her husband's wagon. I tried to save the child. Didn't." She met his eyes, unflinching. "You believed them, didn't you? Before last night." Elias looked away, his silence an answer. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and Samuel stirred, a soft whimper breaking the tension. Miriam crossed to the cradle, lifting the boy with a gentleness that belied her words. She rocked him, humming a tune too soft to name, and his cries faded. Elias watched, his hands clenching. "I buried his mother in Colton's mill," he said, voice low. "Sarah, my cousin. She begged me to take him, said no one else would." Miriam's gaze softened, just a fraction. "Why not you?" Elias's laugh was bitter. "I'm no father. A drifter with nothing but debts and a name no one trusts." He paused, then added, "But I remembered you. From before. You stitched my sister's wedding dress. She said you had steady hands." The memory hung like smoke, fragile but sharp. Miriam set Samuel down, tucking the quilt around him. "Steady. Hands don't save everyone," she said, her voice a whisper. She turned to the window where snow piled against the panes. "They call me cursed, Elias. Why bring him to a curse?" He stepped closer, his boots creaking on the floor. "Because I saw you last night. You didn't hesitate. Not with him." His words were simple, but they landed like a stone in still water, rippling through her. Outside, the town woke fully, its rhythm marked by the clatter of wagons and the distant chime of the church bell. Miriam knew the whispers had already begun, carried on the wind like ash. She'd seen the shadow at her window, the eyes of Eldridge always watching, always judging. By noon, a sharp rap at the door confirmed her fears. She opened it to find Clara Vaughn, a matron of the town's sewing circle, her bonnet tight and her lips tighter. Clara's eyes darted past Miriam to Elias, then to the cradle. "So it's true," she said, voice clipped. "You've taken in a man and a child. The town's talking, Miriam. They say it's unseemly." Miriam's hand gripped the doorframe, her limp hidden by the folds of her dress. "Let them talk," she said, her tone cold as the frost outside. "They've had years of practice." Clara's gaze hardened. "This is different. That child needs a proper home, not this." She gestured at the cottage, its modest hearth and patched curtains. Elias stepped forward, his presence solid but restrained. "He's got a home. For now," he said. "That's more than I could give him." Clara sniffed, undeterred. "The sewing circle meets tomorrow. We'll discuss what's to be done." The door closed, but the chill lingered. Miriam turned to Elias, her hazel eyes blazing. "They won't stop," she said. "Not until they take him." Elias's hand rested on the cradle, his fingers brushing the quilt. "They'll have to get through me first," he said, his voice steady for the first time. Miriam nodded, a silent pact forming in the firelight. She picked up her needle again, stitching with fierce precision, as if sewing shut the wounds of her past. Samuel slept, unaware of the storm brewing beyond the cottage walls. But what would the sewing circle's verdict bring to a woman who refused to bow? The morning sun rose over Eldridge, Iowa in January 1879, its light brittle and thin, slicing through the frost that clung to the town's clapboard roofs like a stubborn grudge. The streets hummed with the crunch of boots and the clatter of market carts as folks prepared for the winter fair, a fleeting distraction from the cold. But beneath the bustle, whispers coiled like smoke, curling around the name of Miriam Hart. Her cottage, tucked at the edge of town, stood resolute, its chimney puffing defiance into the gray sky. Inside, the hearth glowed with a steady warmth, its light dancing across the walls where patched curtains hung like silent sentinels. Miriam, 32, her auburn hair streaked with silver, knelt by the cradle, adjusting the quilt over Samuel. Her hazel eyes, sharp yet softened by the child's presence, lingered on his peaceful face, his tiny hands curled like petals. The woolen dress she wore, meticulously mended, rustled as she moved, her right leg stiff from the old fall that haunted her steps. Across the room, Elias Boone, 41, sat at the table, his dark blonde beard catching the firelight. His gray eyes, once dulled by grief, now held a flicker of resolve. His brown coat hung by the door, its patches a map of his wanderings. He whittled a small wooden spoon, his knife carving slow, deliberate strokes, as if shaping more than wood. "You're good with him," Elias said, nodding toward Samuel, his voice low but earnest. Miriam didn't look up, her fingers smoothing the quilt. "He's easy to be good to," she replied, her tone soft but guarded. The memory of Clara Vaughn's visit lingered, her words, unseemly proper home, cutting deeper than the winter wind. Miriam rose, her limp barely noticeable now, and crossed to her sewing basket, pulling out a half-finished cloak. Her needle flashed, each stitch a quiet act of defiance. Elias set the spoon down, his hands still. "They're not done with you," he said. "Clara's got the town stirred up." Miriam's lips pressed into a thin line. "They've been stirred since Martha Cole," she said, her voice steady but laced with old pain. "I was 29, Elias tried to save her. Held her hand as she bled out. The town didn't see that. They saw a dead mother and a dead child, and they needed someone to blame." She paused, her needle hovering. "You were gone then. You didn't hear them call me cursed." Elias leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "I heard enough when I came back. They say you brought death, but I saw you with Samuel. You brought him life." The words landed softly, like snow on a quiet night, and Miriam's hands faltered, just for a moment. She met his gaze, searching for deceit, but found only sincerity. Samuel stirred, a soft coo breaking the silence, and she crossed to him, lifting him with a tenderness that felt like home. His warmth anchored her, a shield against the town's scorn. Elias watched, then spoke, his voice rough with memory. "Sarah, his mother. She was like a sister to me. Fever took her fast. I promised her I'd find him a home. I failed her, Miriam, but I won't fail him." Miriam rocked Samuel, her humming low and soothing. "You didn't fail her by losing her," she said, her eyes on the child. "You failed her by thinking you had to do it alone." Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. The fire crackled, its warmth a fragile barrier against the cold. Beyond. Outside, the town's whispers grew louder, carried by the market's bustle. By midday, a sharp clatter echoed from the porch. A rock hurled through the snow struck the door. Miriam didn't flinch, but her grip on Samuel tightened. Elias stood, his chair scraping the floor, but she raised a hand. "Don't," she said. "They want to fight, don't give it to them." He hesitated, then sat, his hands clenched. Miriam set Samuel in the cradle and crossed to the door, opening it to find a note pinned to the wood, its ink smudged by frost. "The sewing circle demands a meeting. The child's place is not with you. Town hall, tomorrow noon." Her fingers traced the words, her face unreadable. She handed the note to Elias, who read it in silence, his gray eyes darkening. "They're not just talking now," he said. "They're planning." Miriam nodded, her voice calm but resolute. "Let them plan. I've faced worse than their words." She returned to her sewing, her needle moving with fierce precision as if stitching together the fragments of her courage. Elias picked up his knife again, carving the spoon with renewed focus, each stroke a promise to stand by her. Samuel slept, his soft breaths a quiet rhythm in the room. The firelight bathed them in gold, but the air grew heavy with the weight of what was coming. Miriam glanced at the scarf on the chair, its blue threads a reminder of what she'd lost, and what she refused to lose again. She looked at Elias, then at Samuel, and something unspoken passed between them. A vow, not of love, but of shared defiance. As dusk fell, the town's lanterns flickered to life, their glow a stark contrast to the darkness gathering around Miriam's cottage. The winter fair loomed, a stage for the town's judgment, and the sewing circle's meeting promised to draw blood. What would the town hall reveal when the frost gave way to fire? Noon in Eldridge, Iowa, 1879, arrived with a brittle clarity, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow-dusted streets. The town hall, a squat building of weathered oak, loomed at the center of the winter fair, its steeple piercing a sky as unforgiving as the townsfolk's whispers. Booths of mulled cider and knitted wares buzzed with chatter, but the air grew heavy as Miriam Hart and Elias Boone approached, their steps deliberate on the icy path. Miriam, 32, her auburn hair pinned tightly, wore a woolen dress, its patches hidden by a shawl of deep indigo. Her hazel eyes burned with quiet defiance, though her right leg, scarred by an old fall, slowed her stride. Elias, 41, walked beside her, his dark blonde beard flecked with frost, gray eyes sharp beneath his felt hat. His brown coat, worn but proud, brushed against the quilt-wrapped bundle in his arms. Samuel, the infant whose presence had set the town ablaze. Inside the hall, the air was thick with the scent of wax and judgment. Benches creaked under the weight of the sewing circle, led by Clara Vaughn, whose bonnet framed a face carved from righteous scorn. Townsfolk filled the room, their murmurs a low hum, like bees before a storm. Miriam stood at the front, her hands clasped, while Elias held Samuel close, his breath steady but his grip tight. Clara rose, her voice slicing through the din. "This child," she declared, gesturing at Samuel, "deserves a proper home, not the hearth of a woman stained by death. Miriam Hart has no claim, and Elias Boone no proof of kin. We propose a God-fearing family take the boy." Miriam's jaw tightened, but her voice was clear, unwavering. "I opened my door when you all closed yours," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "Samuel was cold, hungry, motherless. I gave him warmth, milk, a cradle. What have you given him but words?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, some heads nodding, others turning away. Clara's eyes narrowed. "You speak of warmth, but your hands brought death to Martha Cole. The town remembers." Miriam stepped forward, her limp barely noticeable. "I remember too. I held Martha's hand as she died. I fought for her child until my own hands bled. You buried her name and called me cursed. But this boy?" She glanced at Samuel, her voice softening. "He's no curse. He's a chance." Elias shifted, his boots scuffing the floor. "She's right," he said, his voice rough but resonant. "I brought Samuel here because I had nothing left. No home, no family. Just a promise to his mother, my cousin Sarah, to keep him safe. Miriam's the only one who honored that promise." He looked at her, gray eyes steady, and something unspoken passed between them, a gratitude woven into their shared stand. The crowd stirred, a few voices muttering dissent, but others leaned forward, caught by the rawness of his words. A gray-haired elder, Mr. Harrow, cleared his throat. "The law favors kin," he said, his tone measured. "Without proof of blood or marriage, Samuel's care falls to the town's judgment." Clara seized the moment, her smile thin. "The Wilsons, a respectable family, have offered to raise him. They attend church, own land. What do you offer, Miriam? A cottage and a tarnished name?" The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down like snow on a fragile roof. Miriam's hands clenched, but her voice held steady. "I offer him a home where he's wanted, not a trophy for your pity. You can't sow a family with gossip and call it love." A gasp echoed and Clara's face reddened. Elias stepped closer to Miriam, Samuel stirring in his arms. "I ain't much," he said to the crowd, "but I know what it's like to fail someone. I failed Sarah by thinking I could save her alone. I won't fail Samuel by letting you take him from the one person who didn't turn away." His words cracked like ice breaking, raw and unyielding. Mr. Harrow raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "A solution exists," he said. "Marriage would bind you as kin, granting legal claim." The suggestion hung heavy, a spark in a room of dry tinder. Miriam's breath caught, her hazel eyes flickering to Elias. He met her gaze, his expression a mix of surprise and resolve. "I'd do it," he said quietly, not to the crowd but to her. Not for them. For him. Miriam's lips parted, but she didn't speak. The fire in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something softer, unguarded. Clara stood, her voice shrill. "This is mockery. A marriage of convenience won't erase her sins." But the crowd was shifting, some faces softening, others uncertain. Miriam turned to Harrow, her voice firm. "I won't marry to appease you, but I'll sign any paper to keep Samuel. He's mine, not by blood but by choice." The elder nodded slowly, scribbling a note. "We'll consider guardianship. he said. But the matter's not closed. Miriam and Elias left the hall, the winter fair's music a faint echo behind them. Snow fell gently, dusting their shoulders, but the weight of the town's eyes lingered. As they walked, Miriam glanced at Elias, then at Samuel, a quiet vow settling in her heart. What would the elders' ruling mean for a child caught in the town's crossfire? The winter fair in Eldridge, Iowa, 1879, pulsed with life, its lanterns swaying like fireflies against the twilight snow. The air carried the scent of cedar and cider, but beneath the merriment, a current of unease rippled through the town. Miriam Hart's cottage, perched on the outskirts, stood as a quiet rebuke to the whispers that trailed her name. Inside, the hearth burned bright, its golden light spilling across the plank floor, where Miriam, 32, sat stitching a tiny coat for Samuel. Her auburn hair, streaked with silver, framed hazel eyes that gleamed with resolve. Her woolen dress, patched yet elegant, rustled softly, her right leg stiff but steady after years of bearing old wounds. The blue scarf, a silent relic of loss, lay folded nearby, its threads catching the fire's glow. Elias Boone, 41, stood by the window, his dark blonde beard shadowed in the dimming light. His gray eyes scanned the snowy path, wary of the town's next move. His brown coat hung by the door, its patches a testament to his restless past. Samuel slept in the cradle, his quilt of faded roses rising with each gentle breath, unaware of the storm brewing beyond the walls. Miriam glanced at him, her needle pausing. "He's stronger today," she said, voice soft but sure. Elias nodded, his rough hand gripping the windowsill. "Because of you," he said, the words heavy with gratitude, a quiet echo of the pact they'd forged. The town's judgment, however, was not so easily swayed. By morning, a sharp knock shattered the cottage's calm. Miriam opened the door to find Sheriff Amos Tate, his badge glinting under a fur-lined hat. Behind him stood two men in dark coats, their faces stern, county seals on their lapels. "Miss Hart," Tate said, his voice like gravel. "These are county officers. Clara Vaughn's filed a complaint. They're here to review Samuel's guardianship." Miriam's hand tightened on the doorframe, but her hazel eyes held steady. "He's mine by choice," she said. "What more do they need?" The lead officer, a man with a clipped beard, stepped forward. "Papers, ma'am. Proof of kin or legal claim. Without it, the child's care is in question." Elias moved to Miriam's side, his presence solid as oak. "She's given him more than your papers ever could," he said, his gray eyes fierce. Tate raised a hand. "This ain't personal, Boone. It's law." Miriam's voice cut through, calm but unyielding. "Then bring your law outside. I won't talk without him in my arms." She lifted Samuel from the cradle, wrapping him in the quilt, his soft coos a stark contrast to the tension. The officers exchanged glances, then nodded, leading the way to a makeshift table set up near the fair's edge, where snow dusted the ground like ash. Under the open sky, the county men spread their papers, ink freezing in the cold. Townsfolk lingered nearby, their whispers sharp as frost. The officer read from a document, his voice flat. "Without blood ties or marriage, Samuel must be placed with a sanctioned family. The Wilsons have petitioned." Miriam clutched Samuel closer, her breath visible in the air. "I have no papers," she said, "but I have this. A child who sleeps when I hold him, who knows my voice. That's more claim than your ink." The officer frowned, but his eyes softened, caught by her conviction. Elias stepped forward, his voice raw. "I carried him across 2 counties, looking for someone who wouldn't turn him away. Miriam didn't just take him in, she gave him a home. You want to rip him from that for a signature?" The crowd murmured, some faces turning from judgment to doubt. The second officer, younger, hesitated. "The law's clear," he said, but his tone wavered. Miriam's gaze locked on his. "Law didn't save his mother. Mercy did. And mercy's what he'll have with me." The lead officer scribbled a note, his expression unreadable. "We'll report to the county judge," he said. "Stay put until we return." They left, their boots crunching in the snow, leaving the cottage under the town's watchful gaze. Days passed, tense and quiet. Clara Vaughn, weakened by a sudden fever, withdrew her complaint, her absence a silent shift in the town's tide. The fair ended, its lanterns dimmed, and Eldridge softened, as if weary of its own cruelty. Miriam and Elias grew bolder, venturing to the market with Samuel, her shawl bright against the snow, his small hand grasping her finger. Elias carried him through the square, his gray eyes lighter, almost hopeful. Whispers faded, replaced by curious glances, then nods of reluctant respect. One evening, a letter arrived from the county. No judge, no removal. Samuel was theirs, by guardianship, if not by name. Miriam read the words by the hearth, her voice steady but her hands trembling. Elias stood beside her, his rough hand brushing hers, a silent thank you that needed no words. As night fell, Miriam rocked Samuel, his eyes bright in the firelight. Elias mended a chair, his movements sure. The cottage, once a refuge, now felt like a home, its walls holding their shared defiance. But the snow outside still fell, heavy with secrets yet to be uncovered. What would the thawing spring reveal for a family forged in the heart of winter? Spring crept into Eldridge, Iowa, in 1880, soft as a whisper, melting the last of winter's frost into rivulets that sparkled under a tender sun. The clapboard homes of the town shed their icy armor, and wildflowers bloomed along the paths, their colors a quiet rebellion against the gray of months past. Miriam Hart's cottage, once a lonely outpost, now hummed with life, its sagging porch newly mended, its windows flung open to catch the breeze. The hearth, though quieter now, still glowed, a steadfast heart in a home transformed. Miriam, 32, stood in the garden, her auburn hair loose, silver streaks catching the light. Her hazel eyes, once shadowed by grief, shone with a warmth that rivaled the season. Her woolen dress, patched but vibrant, swayed as she pinned a tiny coat to dry, her right leg steady despite its old ache. Elias Boone, 41, knelt nearby, carving a wooden rattle for Samuel, his dark blonde beard softened by the morning's glow. His gray eyes, no longer dulled by loss, followed the child toddling through the grass. His brown coat hung inside, replaced by a linen shirt rolled at the sleeves, its simplicity a testament to a man who'd found his place. Samuel, now, a year-old, laughed as he chased a butterfly, his curls golden in the sunlight, his quilt of faded roses draped over a fence post. The blue scarf, Miriam's relic of loss, rested in her sewing basket, no longer a wound but a thread woven into their story. The town had changed too. The winter fair's whispers had faded, replaced by cautious nods and quiet offerings. Bread, left at Miriam's gate, a bolt of cloth from the market. Clara Vaughn, humbled by her illness, no longer led the sewing circle's charge. Eldridge, weary of its own judgment, began to see Miriam not as cursed, but as steadfast, a woman who'd opened her door when others shut theirs. She walked the market now, Samuel on her hip, her shawl bright against the spring green. Elias followed, carrying a basket of her mended cloaks, his gray eyes meeting hers with a silent gratitude that needed no words. One morning, as Miriam hung linens, Samuel tugged at her skirt, his voice clear and bright. "Mama," he said, reaching up, his small hand grasping her finger. Miriam froze, her breath catching, the word a balm to a heart long scarred. She knelt, pulling him close, her hazel eyes glistening. Elias, watching from the porch, set his carving aside, his throat tight. "He knows," he said, voice rough, but warm. Miriam nodded, her smile soft but radiant. "He always did," she replied, brushing a curl from Samuel's brow. The moment sealed them, not by law or vows, but by a love forged in the crucible of winter. They never married, not with papers or rings. The town asked once, then let it be, content to watch a family bloom without a name. Miriam stitched dresses for the fair, her needle dancing with newfound joy. Elias built a swing for Samuel, his hands steady, crafting a future from the ashes of his past. The cottage became a haven, its garden alive with daisies, its hearth a beacon for those who'd once turned away. Neighbors stopped by, hesitant at first, then lingered, drawn by Samuel's laughter and Miriam's quiet strength. As summer loomed, Miriam and Elias stood in the garden, Samuel between them, his tiny hands in theirs. The sun bathed them in gold, a promise of days yet to come. They'd faced a town's scorn, a winter's wrath, and their own ghosts, emerging not as heroes but as survivors, bound by a child who'd needed them both. Their story, like the wildflowers, grew from hardship, proof that love could take root in the unlikeliest soil. In the late 19th century, women like Miriam, midwives, healers, seamstresses, often bore the weight of society's fears, blamed for tragedies beyond their control. Yet their resilience, like hers, reshaped communities, proving that courage and compassion could outlast prejudice. This tale reminds us that family isn't always born of blood but of choices made in the quiet moments, when a hand reaches out and another takes hold. Thank you for joining us in this journey of gratitude and grace. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more tales of love and redemption. Your support keeps our hearth burning. What new stories will bloom when the heart dares to open its door?